It's Deborah Hamilton, and we're at the MAP Plan, Navigating Your Pet's Journey if something happens to you. Wonderful Sally Anderson Bruce is here, one of our regulars, which I'm thrilled. And for anyone who's listening to this, I have a really interesting topic tonight to talk about in the MAP Plan, because you know MAP stands for Make a Plan, Address the Needs of Your Pet, Appoint Caregivers, and then Publish. So every once in a while, I get time like tonight, thank you, where I have a wonderful participant, and I'm going to have Sally weigh in here in a minute uh, to talk about how you go about doing it. How do you go about making that plan? How do you go about asking the people to care for your pets? What do they really need to know about your pets? And so without further ado, Sally, tell us how everything's going at your house.
Everything is wonderful at our house. Of course, our pet is perfect. She's just the best of the best. But it's interesting. Now, Monday, I have to go someplace for 6 hours. And I'm like, who can I totally trust? It's going to be a cold day in Connecticut. Who will get it that the dog has to stay on lead? She's got to go out. She's got to relieve herself. She's got to have a snack and she'll be fine. Who will totally get that you can't just let her out in the yard? You can't give her any snack. You know, she's an older dog. And it's like, there are certain things you absolutely must tell this person. It's in your mind, it's a given, but for that person, you have to write it down because I'll take care of your pet. No problem. I'll let the pet out. It's like, no, you can't let the pet out. The pet has to be on the lead. This is the snack the pet can have. So it's interesting. It's very specific. And we have a next door neighbor. I'll come in, if you guys want to go on a 2-week vacation, I'll come in twice a day and give the dog food. And I'm like, well, this is not the person that's going to watch our pet. This just simply won't work.
That's a great segue, because I can tell you that when I used to leave my kids and my dogs home with my husband, when I went to a dog show, he said, don't worry, they'll be alive when you get back. And that's a little lower than I really wanted to have care of, that they'll be alive. They might be hanging on to their last breath, but they'll be alive. So you've made a phenomenal point. And what I find is it's really, when I give my workshops, it's really difficult for people to figure out how to broach the subject. First of all, it's hard for them to find people they want to broach the subject with. And then how do they broach the subject? Well, it really should start with you listening first, saying, your neighbor said, well, I'll come over and take care of your pets. Well, tell me a little bit about how that looks, if you were going to do that, because I'd love to know how you would take care of my pets. And it's not challenging. It's sort of curious. It's a curious question. So how does that look? Well, I'd come over in the morning and I'd let her out, without a leash maybe, or with a leash. And then I'd feed her, and then I'd come over at night and let her out and feed her. And then I come back the next morning. And so you're aware of what their parameters are. What they think caring for a dog is, because they don't see you letting the dog out 5 times a day. They don't see you giving the dog snacks during the day, playing with the dog, petting the dog. So there are certain things when you address the needs of a pet needs, especially if you're traveling, a pet needs somebody to be there to fill its day. It really, cats a little bit better. You can leave them alone. My son drives me nuts, but I digress. But with dogs, you really can't leave them alone. You really need somebody going in, taking them out for a walk. I, of course, my own pet peeve is I never let anybody walk my dogs, because God forbid they see a squirrel or they see a cat and they pull the leash. It happened to me last night on the walk with my dog, Roxy. And it didn't happen to me. It happened at me, so to speak. So there I am walking my girl, Roxy, and a lady is walking with her 2 beagles on flexi leads. And they see Roxy and they pull and rip the flexi leads right out of her hand. And the 2 beagles come flying down the road at my dog. And I'm like, okay, I've got to hold my dog's head, because if they start to bite her, I don't want her to bite them, because then it's going to escalate. If they're biting her, I'd rather have that person repair my dog than allowing my dog, who's bigger than beagles, to repair their dog. And if I can keep her from escalating it, it's great. And the lady said, "Oh, they're friendly," which is one of the terms that is sort of like I'm only a little pregnant. Don't tell me your dogs are friendly, because if they were friendly, they wouldn't have ripped the leash out of your hand to come see my dog. They might be friendly, but they're not very well controlled. And we really all have to make sure our animals are controlled. So the reason I go into this is because that's why I don't let anybody ever walk my dog. I have a fenced in yard, and that's exactly where you can go play, throw the ball, throw the toy, sit with them on the back furniture in the backyard, even if it's winter, because we leave things out so you can sit and have them come up. I just want to make sure that you are in the safest position to care for my dogs. But Sally, you were perfect when you said, so what would it look like? And asking that question is key, because um, being able to have a conversation with your caregiver, the people you're considering for caregiving, um, and letting them propose what they would do. In Sally's situation, that was a little less than she'd want. I'll let him out twice a day. Okay, fine. But often I have a neighbor next door who wants to let Roxy out in the worst way when we're not home. And he says, we'll come over 5 or 6 times a day and we'd love to take her on a walk. We'll bring her to our house. We'll, take care of her here. We'll do this, we'll do that. They were way over what I would ever have asked. And I said, thank you so much. If I get stuck, I'm so glad you're here. I.e., remember when we talked about COVID, having a neighbor who can be right there to take your dog if something happens to you or someone in your home, you have to head to or you get delayed, the 7 Ds, right? So you have to make sure that you continue to care for your pet, even though you might not be there. Somebody said to me in one of these programs, so if you're listening to this again, you'll hear this again. What do you mean, Deborah, when you say delay? And I said, well, if you ever been on the highway when somebody had a really bad accident and you sat still, that's a delay. In the old days, pre-COVID, airlines had huge delays, right? So we might not get home that day. And do you have somebody who you can call to take over if your caregiver can't stay that extra day? So being able to have a conversation where you prompt people to answer these questions rather than say, hey, Sally, I'd love you to take care of Roxy. I'm just going to, which I think I did. I just handed her to you. I really probably didn't give you any direction at all. But, telling the audience full disclosure that Sally and I have been friends for probably over 20 years. And so she sort of takes care of my dogs better than I do. And she's the only one I would allow to take my dog to her house and walk it. But there's that trust and that bond. And for anyone who's listening, I want you to know that when Roxy came home, she was shell shocked because no one was barbecuing salmon for her or chicken. And she looked at me as if to say, I want to go back there. And the reason I know this is because when Sally's husband, Gordon, came with the dog that Sally and Gordon and I share, Athena, Roxy went right out to the car to get in to go home. So clearly I'm sending her off into an abusive home and she just likes to go there. No, she loves Sally and Gordon. And, those are the kind of things you have to explore. If you have a friend of 20 years and I know when Connie Kohler is on this call, she has people she's been friends with for 20 years. And she even wrote out, these are what the dogs eat, especially Bama, who's the older grandmother, and the mother and the son. What are they eating? They're all different. And as Sally pointed out, eating something that's not going to upset her belly, because that, first of all, if you're watching her for a few days, you're watching any dog for a few days and you give them food that doesn't agree with them, you're going to regret it. I'm just saying, because I've had that happen. So it's always good to make sure you follow the directions. But when you're asking for people to help you with your pet, asking curious questions that lets them tell you instead of you telling them how they're going to take care of your dogs is much more educational. And sometimes, like with Sally's friend, this is never going to work out because you're not really on the same page with me. But often, like when I leave Roxy with Sally, if I ever asked those curious questions, she would tell me what she would do with Roxy. And I'd say, I think I want to come live with you. And I think, Sally, I've said that many times, right? That I want to come live with you.
Always welcome. Interesting, Deborah, because I have a very close friend. She's the chief animal control officer in the town we live in. And I realized that you are going to be moving. And so I'm thinking, where in the world are we going to put our dog? And so we did a little study. I went over to her house and she's more than willing to take Athena. And we walked in and Athena's great. She's fabulous with the dogs. And she said, let's see how she does with the cat.
Oh
She
yeah, that's
brought out
bad
the
news.
cat, held the cat right up to Athena. Athena smelled the cat. And obviously Athena is not a cat dog. And then she put the cat into a bedroom. The second that we let Athena go, Athena ran all over the house trying to find the cat. And we realized this is prey. You know, she wants that. That's like a squirrel to her. And we realized as much as Audrey is like the perfect dog person, Athena could not live there. She could not go to that house because, except for maybe one day, you know, where the cat would live in one room, Athena in another, it simply won't work, you know, and it's important to know those things ahead of time. You can't just drop your pet off. You have to go ahead, you have to do the research, you have to see if that is the right home for your pet to be in.
Yeah, to spend long-term, short-term. So I have the same issue actually that's coming down the pike for me. My son has a wonderful cat, Lady Jane, who's my grand kitty. And my son is going to join us in North Carolina when we move there, until he figures out what he's going to do because of COVID. His business dried up. So he's coming back and we're thrilled to have him because we haven't seen him. He's been in California for 8 years. But he has a cat. And like Athena, unfortunately, all my dogs have never grown up with cats. And you're right, cats to them are squirrels. Actually, they're even more important than squirrels because squirrels only get a slight scream from Junie. Cats get the entire body shaking on my rear legs, scream at the top of my lungs, because I never had the opportunity. My husband's allergic to cats, so I would have had a cat. But my husband, you know, was allergic, so I haven't had cats. So now you're absolutely right. I have a son coming home, which I'm not going to say don't come home with your cat. However, I am being incredibly aware of the fact that he will be there without any of my dogs for a number of months. So Jane will get her footing. But I said to him, you might want to keep Jane on the second floor because the dogs will be on the first floor and you know, I'm going to be sleeping on the first floor. So there's no reason for them to go to the second floor. And we will put up an impervious gate that has to be locked, so that Jane is safe and they're safe because I don't want them to get hurt either by Jane, who's trying to defend herself. So that you took the time to go to Audrey's and find out whether or not Athena could matriculate. And you're right, you can lock the cat up for a day, but it makes the caregiver and the caregiver's pets off kilter. I mean, even if they say they'll do it, it makes them completely off kilter if in fact your dog requires everybody to be locked up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can't, I mean, a caregiver is so generous, you know, in saying, yes, I'll take your family member, your pet to come to stay at our home, but they absolutely have to understand.
Yes.
We have another friend, I mean, another friend that said, I'll come over and I'll feed her. And he just doesn't get it. You know, he doesn't understand. She's got to be on lead. The little necklace around her neck has to be this tight so she can't like slip out because it's, you know, it's fall. You know, there are deer, you know, there are rodents out there and you have to get all that. It has to be someone you completely explain very, very clearly to. This is what you have to do. And the same for medicine too. But, you know, for going out in the yard, I mean, it could be life threatening.
Yeah, it could be because they could, you know, people said to me, why do you, you know, train your dogs so specifically to the invisible fence at my house? I mean, my dogs would no more step over the invisible fence than walk on hot coals and they couldn't see it. And people would say to me, your dogs, they just will not go off the driveway. And I said, well, when they're very young, I'm very mean. I said, and I really do have them understand that this is a no-fly zone for them because they only have to run off the property once. And that could be enough. And I would never forgive myself. So I actually hard fenced my property, and I'll be hard fencing my property in North Carolina, but I'll also be putting an invisible fence in because I want to make sure that they know this is a no-fly zone. You don't go here unless you're with me. You don't, we're going to have a dock, and I'm like losing my mind trying to figure out what to do with it. But when you're, and I'm going to North Carolina and I'm losing my mind as in, who do I find to take care of my dog? So Sally, you're losing your mind going, who am I going to have take care of Athena? And you'll just have to come visit. We'll just have to meet halfway. It's, I think, 7 hours one way if we meet halfway.
Right. Well, also, Deborah, it's the tone, when you have that invisible fence and there's the tone, because Athena, at our home, we don't have the invisible fence. However, anytime she hears anything similar to that tone,
yep, she stops.
She stops and she runs into the bathroom. She goes behind the toilet and she hides. She understands I can't step over that line.
Yep.
She totally, it was great training from you when she was at home. She understands that tone and what the tone means. You cannot cross that boundary.
They have so many great memories because my guys, we now live in a rental, no invisible fence, but there is a driveway and they actually go to the edge of the path going up to the front door, but they really won't go any further unless we're there. Because they just, it's rote to them. They can only take 10 or 15 steps in the driveway and then they can't go any further. So they really stop. So I don't rely on it, let's put it that way, but it's really, hopeful that they think about it before they go over. They don't even need a sound. They just don't go over it. But it's interesting when you're looking for someone to be the caregiver for your pets. And Sally, that it's often good to find someone who has the same breed, or at least who plays in the park with you, so that they know each other. And that's who you ask the curious questions about, because, okay, so my dog has met this dog on the road while we're walking or in a play date, or they're friends of mine. Or they're, like Athena comes home here and fits in with Junie and Roxy because she's known them. So my thought is that there's a certain male dog up there, Little Mac, who you might think about, they might be a good group because they're going to need somebody to look after him, although you'd rather rip your nails out, although he's older now, so he's not going to be doing that. He's Roxy's brother. But they could be someone who, we have an acquaintance with, that we could expand that because of my abandoning you in the lurch. And that's the other thing that everyone has to learn about when you're doing the MAAP plan. People move, people change, and you can't go, oh my God, I have nobody now because you moved. And how could you do that? You have to work with that person because there might be someone that person knows who might be living near you that could step in and be a really good person to watch your dog. So networking and putting the feelers out there and then asking curious questions, because the other thing you don't ever want to do is you don't want to make somebody angry that you didn't think they were good enough to take care of your pet. And I know, Sally, you know this because there are times when people, offer to take care of your pet. And how do you, so the person who you love, who said, your neighbor, how do you say, not really, and not lose them as a friend? Because you still want them as a friend. You still want to have them over for dinner. You still want to, have fun with them. Just not with your dog. I mean, because that's like my neighbor who I really love, who, God forbid, if it was an emergency, I would be calling them if I couldn't get home. But because I can then call you and Gordon and you can get here in a little while. But if it's an emergency and Roxy hasn't been out, it would be fine for them to come in and let her out. So you really have to work on that diplomacy, which is why I said start with curious questions, start the conversation with, would you consider being a caregiver for my pet? And what would that look like to you? Because I'd love to know what you think caregiving a 60-pound Irish setter entails. And Sally and I both know that having them lay on the couch next to you is the best part. Walking them with high levels of squirrels, cats, and chipmunks, and some deer is the tough part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it depends on the phase of life they're in. Like, very sadly, we also had a long-haired dachshund, and we lost her about a year ago.
I
And
know.
at the very end of her life, it was sort of like I got what she had to have done at that level of her life. You know, when I knew she was near the end, and there was only one person I knew that could understand that. And I called him and I said, you know, she's got to go out, but she can't really walk that well and she can't really stand that well. And he goes, I totally get it. And then we were in New York at a play, obviously before COVID, and I get a text message, and there he is sitting in the yard with her on a pillow. I go, he totally gets it. He goes, I've been sitting here taking a nap for 1 hour, and he understands the phase of that dog's life. Now, fortunately, that's, you know, at the tail end, and we don't have that for a long time in our lives. But you have to understand at what point, you know, are you walking your dog in Arizona in the pitch black in 100 degrees at 5 a.m., or are you talking about where to play in Manhattan and it's like, we're going to be out late, you know, could you come in at 7 and just take the dog out? So you have to really be very, very careful about, you know, who is the caregiver for that particular day and for the medications and the phase in the life.
Absolutely. And that's a great point to make because someone I would let take care of Roxy, I wouldn't necessarily let take care of the wild man of Borneo, otherwise known as Junie, because he's a very strong dog. Although I know that someone, Sally, said that Roxy's a very strong dog, and she is, but you would multiply that by 10 if you were walking Junie. So it really is very important to evaluate your pet over and over and over again. So when I talk about addressing the needs of your pet, they change. They change when they're a puppy. You have to take them out more often. You have to make sure they're on a leash because they, you know, their cum is not as good as it used to be. When they're a little bit older and teenagers, you have to really watch them because they can be naughty and they always have to be on leashes. And you really have to be gentle and kind, and because you want to imprint gentle and kindness on the dogs, so you have to make sure you get people who are gentle and kind so that they can follow in your footsteps and keep the training up for the younger dogs. And then the middle age dogs, like say 6 to 8, they get spits and spurts, so you have to be aware they can really be little troublemakers. And then when they are at the end of their life, which I always say for any of my dogs, every day after their 10th birthday, I hope they make their 10th birthday, but every day after their 10th birthday is a gift. And I thank God every day. So if you've got a little dog, it might be a little longer, like 15 or 20. But for me, I always am thrilled and I always sit down and say my prayers with my dogs every night because I'm so thrilled to have them with me. But as we wrap up tonight, I just want to make sure that everyone who's listening to this understands that the conversation you need to have with your caregiver is not here's their leash, their dog food is in the bin, and there's a mixing bowl there, and let it rip. No, you can't because they might give them too much food. They might not give them enough food. They might, mix it with something that they think is great because they went out to the store and bought a hoagie and the meat on the hoagie was really delicious, but it might have had spices that for one of the dogs would create havoc with its system. So you really do have to take the time to find caregivers who think the way you do, as Sally put so eloquently, who are willing to follow your directions that you leave, because I can always say, yeah, I'm going to do that and then never do it. So you have to really make sure you find someone who's diligent and is going to do the plans the way you want. And also to make sure you have the conversation curiously so that they can answer the question. It's interesting when instead of telling somebody what you want, asking them what they think they can give, because you will learn so much more. And often you will learn things that they will do for your dogs that would be above and beyond anything you would ask them to do for your dogs. But that's because, as Sally said, when she received the picture on the grass, on the pillow, outside, above and beyond probably what she ever expected this wonderful neighbor to do for her dachshund. And that's the kind of thing you want. You want somebody who's going to understand the needs you have, the needs your pet has, and not only meet them, but exceed them, because all of our pets are family members. And if we're going to receive, if we're going to help someone with their pets, we're going to treat them with the amount of love and respect, maybe beyond, that we want our pets to be loved and respected by. So Sally, as we wrap up, any last thoughts?
No, I think Deborah, you've said it so well. I think it's almost like caring for a parent, when you're looking for a caregiver. Um, it's not the first one, it's not the second one, the third, the fourth, the fifth. You have to be very careful. You have to be very clear and precise in exactly what you're looking for. And eventually you realize this is the person, this is the one. And if you're fortunate to find that person, and the MAP plan is perfect, just spelling it all out. This is what I need. My dog has to take this medicine at this time. She has to have a probiotic, her tummy's upset. And right now is not the best night. So maybe chicken broth with just some rice tonight. So as long as you make that clear, and that roast beef is not the best for tonight. Yeah, I agree. Just be very clear, very precise, and yeah, go with the MAP plan for sure. Yeah, so they know long term what you need.
Well, thank you so much, Sally. And thank everyone for being here. It's Deborah Hamilton, the MAP plan. You can find out all sorts of information on how to make your own. You can call me if you need my help to make it. And until next Wednesday, take good care of yourself and kiss your dog for me. Bye now. It's Deborah Hamilton, Hamilton Law Mediation.